You want dyno numbers? I'll get you some dyno numbers. Welcome back, everyone. Now, before we get started, if you're just interested in the horsepower number, skip to the timestamp below. But just know that you're going to miss out on all sorts of fun stuff, including that I've already blown up the trans. Which isn't a joke. I have already destroyed one Subaru 5-speed. What you're watching is a follow-up video about this, my H6 swapped 99 Subaru Legacy that I slapped a junkyard supercharger on. So if you haven't seen that video, go watch it. There's important plot details and character development that you need to see before this one. No spoilers. In this video, you're going to see me run the car in the dyno, get some numbers, and then we'll go over a number of the questions I saw asked in the comments. Now, I don't normally care that much about horsepower numbers, so I honestly never intended to put this car on the dyno. However, a good amount of you commented that you'd like to know what it's putting down, and it's a good excuse for me to get some more dyno time under my belt. Now, you guys obviously aren't here in person, so I guess you don't really have a way to feel how the car behaves. So a dyno graph would probably help you understand just how different this is compared to, say, a WRX or something. So we loaded the shitbox up behind the big yellow hog and set off on a road trip to a shop with a dyno. Our destination was 6-star Performance in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, these guys work on a ton of Subarus, so obviously I had to show up in my Sunday best for the occasion. Now, for what it's worth, getting here is a bit of a haul for me. And the prices of diesel, they ain't looking so good. So, if you like this shirt, check the link in the description to get one for yourself and support my efforts in the process. The guys at 6-star were gracious enough to let me borrow their dyno on short notice, as well as tinker with the dyno software to try out some steady-state tuning, which was pretty fun. Anyway, thanks for letting me use your dyno. It was a real pleasure.
No problem.
But you're not here for that. You're here for this.
That's 370, 380. Bro, that fucker ripped. No wonder you grenade in second gear. You're towards it. Hey, this makes more than your conversation. Oh my god, it does! This is your highest horsepower bill. My junkyard supercharger H6 swapped $600 Legacy makes more power than my LS swapped RX at 18.
387 horsepower, 352 foot-pounds of torque. Let me just do a little recap for those of you who maybe haven't been following along at home. I bought this car for $600. I did an H6 manual swap on it, a few bits of tuning, and then slapped a junkyard supercharger on there. So it's safe to say that my expectations just weren't all that high. Whatever it made, I was going to be happy with it. I figured it'd be around 300, maybe 350. That's what the old butt dyno clocked anyhow. That linear power band really threw me off, I guess. I don't know. So these numbers blew me away. And also made me a little bit nervous. Now here's a dyno graph I found of this same engine in stock form, in like an Outback with the 5-speed auto transmission and whatnot. That's a peak of about 170 horsepower, and that tracks. I've seen a number of graphs and claims that these normally land between 170 and 200, so I think we can agree that this setup is putting down just about double what it did from the factory. Which is just absurd. This engine is still on stock internals, and a number of folks who build these engines have told me that 400 is the max that they'd push them to. And 400 is basically what we're making. Actually, it's 387, not 400. Shut up, nerd. That's too many syllables. I'm not gonna say that every time. So it's 400. Look at the truck I drive. I'm clearly compensating for something, so let me have this. Alright, so we gotta talk about the transmission. Exactly 1 week after I posted the first video about this supercharger build, I was out with some friends, hammering on it as usual. Went and grabbed myself a big old handful of second gear and just let it eat. And eat it did, losing all of its teeth in the process. It's mostly my fault because I gorilla shifted that sucker. Still drove the thing 50 miles back home without second gear though. Now if you're into Subarus, this probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. Subaru 5-speeds are about as worthless as a 4L60, so you gotta have some spares. So here's the original 5-speed, which somehow my paint marker exploded on. And this car now has the backup 5-speed, but just in case this one blows up, we got the backup 5-speed. I know it's time to look into getting a 6-speed, but they're just so expensive. Speaking of blowing stuff up, let's talk about the engine. The EZ30R Boxer 6-cylinder is normally a naturally aspirated engine, so stuffing some boost into it does pose some sort of risk. And as we learned from the dyno, it's making some pretty substantial power, certainly more than I was expecting. I know earlier I said,
now I don't normally care that much about horsepower numbers,
but in this case I kinda do because it's an indicator of how hard I'm running this thing. My impression before the dyno was, we're running relatively tame boost, 8 and 9 PSI, and we're running on E85. So as far as I'm concerned, it'll be fine. But now, after seeing the dyno numbers, I'm second guessing that. Ignorance truly is bliss. But if you think this thing still doesn't bounce off the rev limiter literally every time I drive it, you're dead wrong. I built it to thrash it, and grenading an engine has never stopped me before. Some of you have asked about how I tuned this build, and the answer is by using a standalone ECU. All of my builds use standalones, including this one. Intercooling! Sorry, I didn't know how to transition into this part. Look, this build isn't intercooled, and I really don't plan on intercooling it. Again, because we're on E85, and also because this supercharger just isn't working all that hard. I know I installed a smaller pulley in the last video, but that's because the H6's crank pulley is a lot smaller than the 3800. The 3800 being the engine this supercharger is actually off of. On the 3800, the supercharger spun 1.9 times per engine revolution. When I first slapped the supercharger on this engine, before I swapped to the smaller supercharger pulley, it was only at 1.5 per rev, which is why we were only seeing 3 or so PSI at first. Now, with the smaller pulley, it's right back at that 1.9. So, in other words, this is being driven about as hard as it was in stock form, which is to say, not very hard at all. Well, the manifold is huge. If you made it smaller, the boost would come on faster. Here's the data log of me rowing through the gears. Red is manifold pressure, green is throttle position. The boost comes on literally as fast as I can press the throttle. Well, you know, if you made the intake runners longer, you'd get better low-end torque. Less sharp corners would help with airflow. Trumpet-shaped runners would increase air velocity. You should port the supercharger. Cerakote the rotors. Get the Gen 5. It's a more efficient supercharger. Listen, I'm one guy. I do literally everything myself. The swap, the wiring, the tuning, the CAD, the fabrication, the build, it's all me. This isn't my job. In fact, my actual job has nothing to do with cars. This is just a hobby for me. When you're doing a build, at some point, you gotta draw the line. I don't have the tools, the skills, the money, or quite frankly, the time to do all that. So I keep my builds a bit simpler than most. But here's a little secret about forced induction that the man doesn't want you to know. You could do all those things, sure, or you could just turn up the boost. So, instead of making longer intake runners, if I want more low-end power, I'll just turn up the boost. And in any case, this build does not need any more power. We're already making plenty for those extremely stock internals. I feel like a lot of car guys get caught up in micro-optimizing every little detail of their build and end up taking literally years to get their car running, if even that. So while you're still sitting there waiting for your rotors to get back from Cerakoting, I'll already have blown up at least one transmission. Maybe two by the time you watch this video. Those 5-speeds are made of glass. Set obtainable goals. You don't need to have every little thing be optimized, and you don't need the most horsepower ever. despite what other YouTube certified mechanics would have you believe. This is an incredibly fun car. I've been daily driving it since the H6 swap, and now that it's supercharged, I straight up don't drive anything else. I just can't get enough of it. Fun fact, 88 comments mentioned the motor mounts. That's about 9% of all comments on the video, which is quite a lot. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna leave them the way they are, just to drum up more comments and engagement. It does wonders for the algorithm. Speaking of, feel free to drop your questions and comments below. I added an FAQ on my website and also uploaded the design files I created while making this beast. They're available for free. I also uploaded the tune and the data logs from the Dyno Day for anyone that wants to take a peek at those. I'm not a pro tuner by any means, but if there's even a small chance that this could help someone out there, why not share them, you know? Again, if you want to support my efforts, buy a shirt from the link below. A portion of the proceeds goes directly to funding my projects and this channel. I'm honestly not sure what's next for this car, only that I don't currently plan to turn it up at all. I actually pulled a few degrees of timing while on the dyno, and I don't think you realize how much self-control it took for me not to try and squeeze more power out of this, but it was a lot. If there's anything you'd like to see me do with this car, let me know down below. The Dyno Day was requested by you, the viewers, after all. I'm gonna pinch this one off with just some different angles of this thing doing pulls on the dyno. I'm sure you guys will enjoy them just as much as I did. Bye for now.